The billionaire leaned back in his leather chair, his voice dripping with arrogance as he ordered the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu, never imagining that the quiet waitress before him, with steady hands and watchful eyes, carried an ID that would rip apart his pride and force him to face a truth money could never silence. The city pulsed with neon light, glass towers scraping the sky as though competing for dominance. Inside one of its most exclusive restaurants, a place where velvet drapes muted the chatter of the wealthy and chandeliers bathed polished tables in golden light, sat a man who believed he owned not just the room, but the very air people breathed in his presence. Richard Calloway. To most of the world, he was the kind of man you didn't look at too long. Silver hair combed to perfection, his suit tailored within a millimeter of arrogance, and a watch on his wrist worth more than the annual salaries of the staff serving him. He had built an empire out of steel, oil, and bloodless deals, climbing to billionaire status not by charm, but by crushing competition. People whispered about him with awe. But those who worked under him spoke his name with a kind of silent dread. He was known for his temper, for the way he could dismiss someone's livelihood with a flick of his pen, for how his disdain for the unworthy dripped from every word. And tonight, Richard was in a particularly sour mood. The merger he had been working on was delayed, his board members questioned his tactics, and his second wife, 30 years younger, chosen more for her social sparkle than her heart, had left him only days before. He sat at his favorite table, alone but defiant, sipping bourbon as though the world needed to be reminded he was untouchable. But the world was about to remind Richard Calloway of something else entirely. Across the room, weaving gracefully through a minefield of clinking glasses and polished shoes, moved Maya Thompson. To the unobservant, she was just a waitress. Crisp black uniform, hair pulled into a tidy bun, tray balanced with ease. But to those who looked closer, there was something about her presence that unsettled, an energy both quiet and unyielding. Her brown eyes held warmth, but also a spark of something sharper, something that made you wonder what battles she had fought and what truths she carried like armor. Maya was 28, and the restaurant was not her dream. It was survival. She had grown up in the shadows of the same city Richard Calloway claimed as his kingdom, in neighborhoods where the lights flickered and hope felt rationed. Her mother had taught her resilience. Her grandmother had taught her dignity. And those lessons were written in every step she took. She worked long hours, paid her bills late, and studied at night. The ID in her purse, tucked into her wallet, wasn't just a government-issued card. It was a key to a truth she kept hidden, a truth tied to the very man sitting at table 12. Tonight, fate had pushed their paths into collision. Maya noticed him immediately. Everyone did. Richard Calloway radiated power, but not the kind that inspired respect. It was the kind that suffocated. She took a breath, steadied herself, and approached with the trained smile of someone who had learned to mask disdain beneath courtesy. "Good evening, sir," she said softly, her voice smooth but professional. "Welcome back. Would you like to start with something to drink?" Richard's eyes flicked up, scanning her like she was furniture. His lips curled into something resembling a smirk. "I'll have the Bordeaux, the most expensive one on your list. And make sure it's decanted properly this time." The last girl clearly didn't know what she was doing. The words weren't just dismissive, they carried that cutting undertone, the one Maya knew all too well. That undertone that said, "You don't belong in my world, and I'll remind you of it every chance I get." She kept her smile in place, though her fingers pressed just a little tighter around her notepad. "Of course, sir. I'll take care of it right away." As she walked away, Richard muttered just loud enough to be heard by the suited man across from him, his business partner for the night. "Everywhere you go, these people are serving you. But ask them to get something right, and they still manage to mess it up." The words hit Maya like a pebble to glass, not breaking her, but creating cracks only she could feel. But unlike most, Maya didn't let it settle as just another scar. She would serve him his wine. She would follow the rules. But when the time came, she would remind Richard Calloway of something he had long forgotten. That money couldn't erase blood, and arrogance couldn't bury truth. The restaurant hummed on, oblivious to the fault line forming at table 12. Richard leaned back, sipping his bourbon, convinced he was the one in control. Maya returned with the bottle, her hands steady, her gaze unreadable. She placed it before him, elegant in her service, every motion precise. He barely looked at her as she poured, his laughter booming at some cruel joke he had told his associate. But deep in her pocket, resting against the fabric of her uniform, was her wallet. And inside, her ID waited like a loaded gun, ready to end the illusion of Richard Calloway's superiority with a truth he never expected. Welcome back, my amazing family and friends. If you're ready to dive into this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. Because tomorrow, I'll be sharing another story that's just as captivating, and you won't want to miss it. Now, let's get started. The Bordeaux was poured, the crimson liquid shimmering under the chandelier's glow. Richard Calloway lifted his glass with practiced elegance, swirling it as if the performance mattered more than the taste itself. His companion, a younger executive desperate for Richard's approval, mirrored the gesture clumsily. Richard took a slow sip, his lips curving into a smirk. Now this, he said loudly, as if the entire room needed to hear, is how wealth rewards patience. Vintage, refined unlike most of the company one finds in this city. Maya stood a few feet away, tray balanced against her hip. She had heard every word. She always did. Richard set his glass down and gestured toward her with a lazy flick of his hand. You, he said. Yes, you. Tell me, do you even know what this wine is worth? Or is it just another bottle to you? Something you'll never touch except to serve. The question wasn't really a question. It was a performance, designed to remind her of her place. Maya inhaled, slow and controlled, before responding. I know its worth, sir. But I also know worth isn't always measured in money. Richard raised an eyebrow, surprised by the reply. His companion chuckled nervously, sensing the tension. Careful, Maya, Richard said, finally bothering to glance at the name tag pinned to her uniform. People in your position shouldn't get clever. It doesn't suit you. She nodded politely, her expression unreadable. But inside, something coiled tighter. The dinner dragged on, Richard peppering the evening with cutting remarks, each one sharpened with arrogance. He complained about the temperature of the steak, about the pacing of the service, about the very air conditioning. Every complaint was delivered with the assurance that his money made him untouchable. Yet Maya's composure never faltered. She refilled glasses with steady hands. She delivered dishes with quiet grace. And when she was dismissed, she walked away without flinching. But beneath her calm exterior, her heart pounded. Because the ID in her wallet wasn't just a card, it was a story. A story that would unravel everything Richard thought he knew about himself. It happened midway through dessert. Richard was laughing, his booming voice carrying across the restaurant as he ridiculed a competitor's downfall. The executive laughed along, eager to echo every sneer. When Maya approached with the bill folder, Richard snatched it from her hand without so much as a thank you. He glanced at the slip, tossed a black card inside, and snapped it shut before thrusting it back at her. But then he paused. His sharp eyes narrowed. Wait, he said, his voice dropping. I don't know why it bothers me, but your face, it's familiar. The laughter drained from the table. Maya's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to notice, not yet. But here it was, the opening she couldn't ignore. Is that so, sir? She asked softly. Richard leaned forward, studying her features with a furrowed brow. Yes. It's uncanny, actually. Do you have family in this city? People I might know. Maya hesitated. Her hand brushed the edge of her pocket. For years, she had carried the truth quietly, hidden from men like him. But tonight, under the suffocating weight of his arrogance, she realized she could not stay silent. With a slow, deliberate motion, she set down her tray on the table's edge and reached into her pocket. She pulled out her wallet, flipped it open, and withdrew her ID card. Her fingers trembled, not with fear, but with anticipation. She placed the ID gently on the linen tablecloth, sliding it toward him. Richard glanced at it, impatient at first. Then his expression shifted. His smirk faltered. His eyes flicked from the card to her face, then back again. The restaurant noise seemed to fade, as though the chandeliers themselves held their breath. Maya Thompson, he read aloud, his voice cracking ever so slightly. But it wasn't the name that froze him, it was the line beneath it. The birthplace. The parent listed in the government records. He looked up at her, color draining from his cheeks. This can't be. Maya met his gaze, her voice calm, steady, but heavy with years of unspoken truth. It can. And it is. His companion looked between them, confused. Richard? What's going on? But Richard couldn't answer. His throat tightened. The arrogant mask he had worn like armor slipped, leaving him exposed. Because in that moment, staring at the ID, Richard Calloway saw more than just a waitress. He saw blood he had tried to forget. A decision he had buried. A daughter, flesh of his flesh. standing before him in the uniform of someone he had belittled moments earlier. The silence stretched unbearable. Maya retrieved the card with deliberate grace and slid it back into her wallet. She leaned closer, her voice low enough only he could hear. Worth, Richard, is not always measured in money. You taught me that the day you left. Richard flinched as though struck. The words sliced deeper than any boardroom betrayal. The executive shifted uncomfortably, sensing the weight of something monumental yet unseen. But Richard could only stare at Maya, his world unraveling in a single heartbeat. The air between them grew thick, almost suffocating. Richard Calloway, the man who commanded empires with his voice alone, now sat in silence, staring at the half-empty glass of Bordeaux like it held answers. His hand trembled faintly, though he tried to disguise it by adjusting his cufflinks. Maya had retreated, but not far. She hovered by the service station, her body poised in a strange limbo between duty and defiance. She could feel his eyes on her, though every time she turned, Richard looked away, unable to meet her gaze for more than a fleeting second. For years, Maya had imagined this moment. She had rehearsed it in her mind, sculpting sharp words that would slice through his arrogance. Yet now that the truth had been laid bare, she found herself drowning in a different tide, exhaustion. It wasn't triumph she felt. It was the weight of everything unspoken, pressing down on her chest. Richard's associate shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Richard," he murmured, "are you all right?" Richard's jaw tightened. He forced a hollow chuckle. "Fine. Perfectly fine. Just a little indigestion." The lie sat heavy, transparent. The associate excused himself soon after, muttering about a phone call, leaving Richard alone at the table. Alone with the truth. When Maya returned to clear the plates, Richard finally spoke. His voice was low, but sharp, laced with a desperate attempt to reassert control. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. Maya arched an eyebrow. "Shown you the truth. You ambushed me," he snapped. "In public. Do you have any idea what that could do to me? To my reputation?" Her laugh was soft, bitter. "Your reputation? That's what you're worried about." Richard looked up at her, his eyes narrowing. "You don't understand the world I live in." Maya leaned closer, her voice firm but quiet. "No, Richard. You don't understand mine. You left me to it." The words landed like stones. He flinched, but pride forced him upright. "I didn't know." His voice faltered. "It was complicated." "Complicated," Maya repeated, her tone laced with disbelief. "It was abandonment. Call it what it was." The table between them might as well have been a battlefield. Richard clung to denial, to the only weapon he had left, silence. Maya stood tall, but inside, her heart cracked with the familiar ache of a child left behind. Later that night, long after Richard had left the restaurant, Maya sat in the break room, staring at her reflection in the smudged mirror above the sink. Her co-workers bustled around her, but their voices blurred. She replayed his face, the way it drained of color when he saw the ID. She should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt raw. She whispered to her reflection, "Why wasn't it enough to hurt him? Why does it still hurt me?" Her throat tightened. For all her strength, part of her still longed for something foolish, something she hated herself for, recognition. A father's acknowledgement. Maybe even love. Meanwhile, in the back seat of his limousine, Richard sat in silence as the city lights streaked past. His driver dared not speak. Richard's hand clutched the ID image burned into his mind, the truth gnawing at him. He had built his empire on control. On numbers, contracts, signatures. Yet here was something he couldn't sign away, couldn't buy, couldn't erase. A daughter. The thought clawed at him. Memories surfaced, of her mother, of choices made in the arrogance of youth, of doors closed and hearts turned cold. He had told himself it was necessary, that success demanded sacrifice. But now, staring at the city skyline, he felt hollow. The following day, Maya arrived for her shift with the same steady gait, but her co-workers noticed her quietness. She moved mechanically, avoiding the corner table where Richard had sat. Yet she knew deep down that this wasn't over. Men like Richard didn't retreat quietly. Sure enough, late that evening, a shadow fell across her section. She looked up, and there he was again. No associate this time. No booming laugh. Just Richard Calloway, alone. Maya straightened, every muscle taut. "Back for another bottle of Bordeaux?" she asked flatly. He shook his head, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Back for answers." Maya's lips tightened. "You had decades to ask questions." Richard sighed, lowering himself into the chair. For the first time, he looked less like a titan and more like a man haunted. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted quietly. "I don't know what you expect from me." Her heart twisted. She wanted to scream, to laugh, to cry. Instead, she said, "I don't expect anything. Not anymore. I just wanted you to know the truth. To see me." Richard's eyes flickered, but he said nothing. The silence between them was louder than any words. That night ended with no resolution. Richard left before dessert, and Maya stayed long after closing, scrubbing tables until her hands ached. Both of them, in their own corners of the city, resisted the pull of truth. Both tried to bury the revelation beneath layers of pride, pain, and fear. But the truth had a way of lingering. It gnawed at them in the dark, whispering that the story wasn't finished. Do you believe some wounds can ever truly heal after years of silence? Or is the damage permanent once trust is broken? Tell me what you think in the comments. The universe has a way of pressing people into corners they're not ready to face. For Maya and Richard, that corner came just 2 days later. The restaurant was booked solid that Friday evening. Politicians, celebrities, and executives filled the velvet booths. Every server was stretched thin, weaving through the crowded floor with plates balanced like extensions of their bodies. Maya was assigned to the largest private dining room, a space usually reserved for the wealthiest guests. When she stepped inside, her chest tightened. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Richard Calloway. For a split second, Maya considered asking her manager to switch sections. But before she could, the manager whispered, "Maya, we need our best on this table. Handle it." And with that, he was gone. She swallowed hard. Fate, it seemed, wasn't finished with them. Richard noticed her immediately. His expression flickered, guilt, surprise, maybe even relief, but he masked it quickly with the neutral face of a man used to being watched. Around him sat 6 other powerful men, all colleagues and investors. Their laughter echoed off the wood-paneled walls, filling the room with the smug ease of people who believed the world bent for them. Maya forced her shoulders straight and approached with a professional smile. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Maya, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Her voice didn't waver, but her pulse raced. Richard's gaze lingered on her longer than it should have. She ignored it, reciting specials, pouring wine, moving with flawless precision. Yet every step closer to him felt like standing on a fault line. Halfway through the evening, the tension broke. One of the investors, emboldened by too much whiskey, leaned back in his chair and gave Maya a slow, appraising look. "Well now, Richard," he drawled, "you didn't tell us the service here came with such beauty." The men roared with laughter. Maya froze, heat rising in her chest. She'd endured comments before, but something about this one, so casual, so entitled, made her fists clench. Richard's eyes darted to her, then to the investor. For a moment, it looked as though he would laugh too. That's what he always did, blend into arrogance, let cruelty slide. But instead, his jaw tightened. He set down his glass, his voice cool but firm. "That's enough." The room fell silent. The investor blinked in surprise. "Just a joke." "Not a funny one," Richard said sharply. His gaze flicked back to Maya, an unspoken apology in his eyes. The men shifted awkwardly, laughter dying in their throats. Maya forced a tight smile and continued pouring wine, but inside, her heart raced for a different reason. For the first time, Richard hadn't joined in the cruelty. He had stopped it. Later, as the investors grew distracted with their meals, Richard leaned back in his chair. His voice was low, meant only for her. "I didn't want you here tonight," he admitted. "Not because of you, but because I can't ignore what I saw." Maya didn't look at him as she set down a plate of seared salmon. "You've ignored it for 28 years. Don't pretend it suddenly matters now." His throat tightened. "I didn't know you'd." She cut him off, her voice cold but trembling beneath. "Don't you dare say you didn't know. You knew enough to walk away." The words sliced through him. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to defend himself. They moved around each other for the rest of the night, bound by the room, by the hungry eyes of investors, by the unspoken truth hanging heavy between them. Every time their hands brushed passing a glass, every time their eyes met across the table, it was another reminder that neither of them could escape. When the investors finally left, stumbling into the night with drunken goodbyes, Richard remained behind. He stood in the empty room, watching Maya gather glasses. "You shouldn't have to clean up after them," he said softly. Maya didn't pause. "It's my job." "Maybe it shouldn't be," he murmured. Her hands stilled on a wine glass. She turned to face him, eyes blazing. And what do you suggest? That you swoop in now, 28 years too late, and fix my life with money? Richard flinched. The truth in her voice burned hotter than the Bordeaux they'd shared. I don't want to fix you, he said quietly. I just want to know you. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Maya shook her head, gathering her tray. You had that chance, and you traded it for your empire. She walked past him, her shoulders rigid, but her heart racing. Behind her, Richard remained standing in the quiet dining room, more alone than he had ever felt. That night, neither of them slept. Maya lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering if letting him in, just a little, would only reopen old wounds. Richard sat in his penthouse suite, the city skyline glittering outside his window, wondering if he could survive the shame of admitting the truth. That he had been wrong, that he had been weak, that he had abandoned something priceless. Circumstance had forced them into the same room. Now the question was whether they would keep resisting, or finally face what lay between them. The storm broke 3 nights later. Maya was finishing a late shift when the restaurant's front doors opened, and there he was again. Richard Calloway, immaculately dressed, impossibly composed, yet with something restless in his eyes. He wasn't here for dinner, not this time. He was here for her. Her manager, sensing the tension, quickly said, Maya, take your break. He asked to speak with you. Every instinct told her to refuse. But another part, the part that had spent years craving answers, stirred. She untied her apron, wiped her hands, and stepped outside with him into the cool night air. They walked in silence to the edge of the parking lot, where a street lamp buzzed overhead. Finally, Richard spoke. I owe you the truth, he said quietly. Maya crossed her arms, her stance sharp, defensive. You owe me a lifetime, Richard. Truth won't cover that. He swallowed. The name, his name, on her lips shook him more than he expected. You're right, he admitted. I failed you. I failed your mother. Her chest tightened at the mention. Don't, she warned. But he pressed on. When I met her, when I met Althea, she was unlike anyone I had ever known. Brilliant. Beautiful. She challenged me in ways no one dared. But my family, my world, wasn't built to accept her. A black woman with fire in her eyes didn't fit the picture my father painted for me. Maya's hands curled into fists. So you let him paint you into a coward. Richard winced. Yes. His voice cracked for the first time. Yes, I did. He told her about the pressure, the veiled threats from his father, the empire dangling like a prize on a string. About the night Althea told him she was pregnant, and how instead of joy, he'd felt fear. Fear of losing everything he had been groomed for since birth. So he walked away. Your mother begged me to stay, he whispered. She told me love should be stronger than money. And she was right. But I was weak. I chose legacy over love. I thought I could live with it. He looked at her then, eyes glassy. I couldn't. I haven't lived with it. I've only existed. Maya's throat burned with unshed tears. She wanted to scream at him, to strike him, to make him feel the decades of abandonment that had shaped her life. But she also wanted to know more. She took a shaky breath. Do you know what your absence did to us? To me. Her voice broke as memories poured out. Mom worked double shifts just to keep food on the table. Some nights, she'd fall asleep at the kitchen counter, head on the bills she couldn't pay. I'd cover her with a blanket and try not to cry because I didn't want her to think I was weak. And when kids at school asked why I didn't have a dad, I'd make up stories. I said you were traveling. Important. That one day you'd come back. She laughed bitterly. I was stupid enough to believe it. Richard's face crumpled. Maya. She cut him off, her words sharp with pain. Do you know what it's like to sit at every birthday, every graduation, looking at the empty chair and pretending it doesn't matter? Do you know what it's like to watch your mother waste away with cancer and whisper your father's name as if he'd appear at the end? Her voice dropped to a whisper. She died believing you'd show up. You never did. The night pressed in around them, thick and heavy. Richard's chest heaved as he fought for words, but none came. All he could do was bow his head, shame etching deep lines into his face. I can't undo what I've done, he said finally. But I can face it. I can face you. If you'll let me. Maya turned away, blinking back tears. The wound was too deep to heal with words alone. Yet in his voice, she heard something she had never heard before, regret, raw and unpolished. She didn't answer him then. She simply walked back toward the restaurant, leaving him standing under the buzzing street lamp, a man stripped of his armor. But that night, lying awake in her small apartment, Maya couldn't stop hearing his voice. The honesty, the cracks in it, the way he said her mother's name. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder, was it possible for someone like him to change? And Richard, back in his glass-walled penthouse, sat alone with a glass of untouched scotch, staring at the city below. For decades, he had silenced the part of himself that longed for family, that longed for forgiveness. Now it roared inside him. The past had been unveiled. The question was, what would they do with it? Secrets have a way of clawing into the light, no matter how deeply buried. Richard Calloway had spent nearly 3 decades building an empire on control. Every deal calculated, every headline managed. But this secret, the one embodied by the young woman serving wine in a downtown restaurant, could not be contained. It started with a photograph. A paparazzo, loitering outside the restaurant that Friday night, caught a blurry but unmistakable shot. Richard Calloway standing under a street lamp with Maya, their faces taut with emotion. By morning, the picture was splashed across gossip blogs. Unknown woman confronts billionaire CEO, the headline screamed. Within hours, the story spread like wildfire. Who was she? Why was Calloway meeting her in secret? The tabloids spun tales of affairs, illegitimate children, scandal. For Maya, it was a nightmare. She woke to dozens of missed calls from coworkers. Her manager pulled her aside before her shift. Maya, the press has been calling nonstop. They think you're involved with him. Maya's cheeks burned with humiliation. I'm not. I know, the manager said gently. But perception is everything. Just keep your head down. But there was no keeping her head down. By the end of the day, photographers were camped outside the restaurant. Customers whispered when she walked by. Online forums dissected her life, piecing together scraps of her social media to build narratives that weren't true. For a woman who had spent her whole life unnoticed, the sudden spotlight felt like suffocation. Richard's board of directors called an emergency meeting. Richard, this is a problem, one of the men said, slamming a printout of the headline onto the polished oak table. The stock dipped 3 points this morning. Investors are nervous. They think you're hiding something. Richard's jaw tightened. Because I am. The room fell silent. He straightened his shoulders, eyes scanning the faces of men who had once looked at him like a golden heir. The woman in that photo, Maya, is my daughter. A collective gasp rippled across the room. You mean to tell us, another board member said slowly, that you have an adult child and you never disclosed it? Do you realize what this could do to your reputation? To the company? Richard's voice hardened. For 28 years, I let fear dictate my choices. Not anymore. But even as he said it, he knew the fallout was only beginning. The press conference was unavoidable. Richard stood at the podium, cameras flashing, reporters barking questions. For the first time in his career, he didn't have a polished speech, just raw truth. Yes, Maya is my daughter. Yes, I abandoned her and her mother. I was a coward. I chose my inheritance over my family. And I've lived with that shame ever since. The crowd buzzed with shock. Some reporters pushed forward, shouting, Does she want a relationship with you? Is she seeking money? Will she inherit part of your company? Richard raised a hand. Maya owes you nothing. She owes me nothing. If she wants nothing to do with me, that is her right. This is my burden to carry, not hers. The honesty, the uncharacteristic vulnerability, stunned the room. But while some praised his candor, others called it reckless. Overnight, the media machine turned the story into a feeding frenzy. For Maya, the sudden exposure was unbearable. She sat in her apartment, curtains drawn, her phone buzzing relentlessly with interview requests. Former classmates reached out, eager to claim connection to the billionaire's daughter. Some were cruel, accusing her of chasing money. Others pitied her. She wanted none of it. When Richard showed up at her door one evening, she nearly didn't open it. But something in her gut told her to listen. He stood there, shoulders heavy, eyes tired. I didn't mean for it to explode like this, he said softly. But I won't run anymore. Maya crossed her arms. And what about me? You dropped your truth like a bomb, and now I'm the one bleeding. I know, he admitted. And I'll protect you however I can. But Maya, I couldn't keep hiding you. Not when you deserve to be seen. Her chest tightened. Part of her hated him for dragging her into the spotlight. But another part, small, fragile, ached at the thought that after all these years, he was finally claiming her as his own. The fallout reached a breaking point when a protest formed outside Calloway headquarters. Some activists accused him of hypocrisy, pointing to his company's lack of diversity while he now paraded his biracial daughter as a shield. Others argued he was finally facing accountability. Maya watched the news from her couch, torn between fury and grief. This wasn't the life she wanted. She hadn't asked for his empire, his shame, or his redemption. She just wanted answers. That night, she called him. Her voice was sharp. "We need to talk. In private. No cameras, no board members. Just us." Richard's heart leapt at the chance. Anywhere, anytime. She hesitated. "Tomorrow. The place Mom used to take me. The little pier by the river. Be there." When the call ended, Maya sat in silence, staring at her reflection in the dark window. For the first time, she wasn't sure if she wanted to tear him apart or let him in. The river at dusk was a mirror of shifting colors, lavender fading into ink blue, streaks of gold bleeding across the water before night swallowed them whole. It was the place where Maya's mother used to bring her for picnics, where laughter had mixed with the splash of skipping stones, where a little girl had once stared at the horizon and asked why her daddy never came. Now that same girl, grown, wary, and burning with anger, stood waiting on the weathered wooden pier. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. Heavy, deliberate, betraying the weight of a man unused to following someone else's summons. Richard's figure emerged from the path, tall and commanding even in humility. His suit jacket was gone, his tie loose, as if he had stripped away his armor for this meeting. Maya didn't move. She just folded her arms and let the silence between them speak first. "You came," Richard said quietly. "I said I would," she replied. Her tone was clipped, but her eyes glimmered with something harsher than indifference, pain. He stepped closer, stopping a few feet away, as though an invisible line divided them. "This place," he murmured, glancing at the river. "Your mother used to love it. I should have been here with you both. But I wasn't." Her laugh was sharp, brittle. "That's an understatement." Richard swallowed. "I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know." "Stop," Maya cut in, her voice rising. "You want me to know? Do you realize what it was like growing up fatherless while you were out there, on magazine covers, on TV, hailed as some visionary leader? Every time your face flashed across a screen, it was like a slap in mine." Her fists clenched, nails digging into her palms. "Do you know what Mom told me every time I asked about you? She said you chose money over us. That you were ashamed of me. Do you have any idea what that does to a kid?" Richard's face crumpled. "Maya." "No," she shouted, her voice cracking. "You don't get to say my name like that, like it suddenly matters. You didn't want me then. You don't get to claim me now just because your guilt finally caught up." The air between them quivered with rage and grief. Richard took a trembling breath, his pride stripped raw. "I was a coward," he admitted. "I let fear of my father, of society, dictate my choices. And in the process, I abandoned the two people who should have mattered most. I destroyed your mother. I destroyed us." Maya's throat tightened, but her eyes stayed hard. "Do you even know who I am? Not your daughter, not some headline. Me. Do you know what my favorite book is? What career I want? Do you know what Mom whispered to me when she was dying?" Richard's silence was his answer. Her voice dropped to a whisper, each word laced with venom and sorrow. "You don't. You've missed everything. And now you want to swoop in and what? Play hero. Earn redemption. You don't get to rewrite the story just because you feel bad." The river breeze lifted strands of her hair, and Richard felt the weight of every unspoken year pressing down. He reached a hand out, hesitating. "Maya, please. Tell me about you. Let me know you, even if you never forgive me." But Maya shook her head, eyes wet with fury. "You don't deserve to know me. Not after what you stole. You didn't just leave. You left me believing I wasn't enough." Richard flinched, as if her words had cut flesh. "And maybe I'm not," she added bitterly. "Maybe I'll never be enough for a man like you. But I'll be damned if I let your shame define me." Her words shattered him. For a moment, Richard's vision blurred, tears threatening to spill. Tears he hadn't allowed himself in decades. He had faced hostile takeovers, political storms, even the death of his own father without breaking. But this, the judgment of the daughter he had forsaken, was unbearable. He staggered back a step, his voice hoarse. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't deserve to know you. Maybe all I'll ever be is the man who abandoned his own blood. But Maya," his voice cracked, the sound almost foreign to his ears. "You are enough. You've always been enough. It was me who wasn't." For the first time, Maya's composure faltered. Her chest rose and fell in ragged breaths, her eyes brimming though she blinked them back. But instead of softening, she turned away. "Go," she whispered. "Please, just go." The finality in her voice struck like a blade. Richard lingered for one tortured heartbeat, then turned, his footsteps retreating down the pier. Maya stood frozen, staring at the river, at the ripples that blurred the reflection of the sky. Her entire body trembled, torn between rage and the ache of a daughter who had finally spoken her truth, but felt emptier for it. For Richard, each step away was agony. By the time he reached his car, his hands shook too much to grip the wheel. For the first time in his life, he felt utterly powerless. No deal to broker, no check to write, no empire to shield him. Just the hollow weight of loss. That night, both of them lay awake, separated by miles, but bound by wounds too raw to heal. Each wondered if the bridge between them had just collapsed for good. And yet, beneath the rubble of anger, something still glimmered. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the faintest, fragile possibility that the story wasn't over. The days after the pier felt like walking through smoke. For Maya, life returned to its routines on the surface, serving tables, cashing tips, slipping into bed at night. But nothing inside her felt ordinary anymore. She had finally spoken her rage, hurled every wound at the man who had caused them. She should have felt lighter. Instead, she felt hollow, as though her fury had left a crater where her heart should be. At night she replayed his words, "You are enough. You've always been enough." But the bitter part of her countered, "Then why didn't he stay?" Richard, meanwhile, was unraveling. He sat alone in his penthouse, curtains drawn, the skyline of the city burning in the distance. For the first time in decades, he ignored his emails, his phone, the stack of financial reports waiting for his signature. He could no longer care about numbers, when the only ledger that mattered was the one where he owed his daughter everything. He poured himself a drink but barely touched it, staring instead at the photo on the wall, his board of directors, smiling after another successful quarter. All men in tailored suits. Not one of them knew the cost of his silence. For the first time, he wondered if the empire he had built was worth the family he had lost. On the third night, Richard found himself standing in front of a small wooden box he hadn't opened in years. Inside were letters, unsent, yellowed with time. Each one written to Maya. "My dearest girl, today is your first birthday. I wish I could be there. You must be 6 by now. Do you like school? Do you know I think of you every day? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." His hands trembled as he shuffled through them. He had written hundreds, but never mailed a single one. What use were words to a child abandoned? But maybe they were worth something now. Across town, Maya found herself sitting at the pier again. The night was warm, crickets humming in the grass. She clutched a small silver locket in her palm, the one her mother had given her before she died. Inside was a faded photo of Maya as a baby, nestled in her mother's arms. The other side of the locket had always been empty. Her mother had once whispered, "One day, you'll decide if you want him in here or not." Maya hadn't understood then. Now she did. It wasn't about the man, it was about the choice. She could keep her heart sealed, the locket half empty forever. Or she could risk the pain of opening it, of letting the man who had hurt her also be the one to heal her. The following morning, Richard made his decision. He dialed Maya's number with shaking hands, expecting it to go to voicemail. To his surprise, she picked up. Silence stretched, thick and awkward. Finally, he spoke. "I have something for you. Letters. Hundreds of them. I never sent them because I was too much of a coward. But they're yours if you'll have them." Maya's voice was steady, but her heart pounded. "Why now?" "Because they're all I have left of the years I stole from you. And because I don't want to leave this world with you thinking you were unwanted." The line went quiet. Maya closed her eyes, torn between slamming the phone down and holding onto it like a lifeline. At last she whispered, "Where?" They agreed to meet in a quiet park, far from the cameras and gossip. Richard arrived early, clutching the wooden box like it contained his soul. When Maya appeared, her steps slow and uncertain, his throat tightened. She looked like her mother in the tilt of her chin, but her gaze was entirely her own, sharp, questioning, unyielding. He held out the box. "These belong to you." She hesitated before taking it. Lifting the lid, she saw the letters, page after page of ink, some smudged with what might have been tears. She picked one at random, unfolding the paper. Her eyes scanned the words. "Maya, I saw a little girl today with braids, and it made me wonder if your mother does your hair that way. I hope so. I bet you're beautiful." Her lips trembled. She folded the letter back carefully. "You wrote these," she murmured, "but you never came." "I know," Richard admitted. His voice cracked. and it's the greatest regret of my life." For a long moment, they sat in silence on the park bench. The letters between them felt like ghosts, whispering of what could have been. Finally, Maya spoke, her voice softer now. "I don't know if I can forgive you." "Not yet." Richard nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't expect you to. I don't want to lose the chance to try. Even if all you'll ever give me is 5 minutes a year, I'll take it." Maya studied him, searching for arrogance, for manipulation, but there was none. Just a man stripped bare. And something inside her shifted. She wasn't ready to call him Dad. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, she was ready to stop calling him stranger. That night, back in her apartment, Maya placed the wooden box on her dresser. She opened her locket, staring at the empty side. Then she slipped one of the letters inside, folding it small until it fit. The locket clicked shut. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "One day you'll decide." And for the first time, Maya whispered into the quiet, "Maybe today." The following week dawned clear and bright, the kind of morning that made the city seem softer, less cruel. The storm of headlines had begun to settle. Other scandals rose to the surface, drawing the media away. For the first time in days, Maya could walk to work without cameras flashing in her face. But something else lingered, a question pressing at her chest. Was she ready to let Richard back in? She didn't have an answer yet. Only a pull, quiet but insistent, that kept tugging her toward the possibility. Richard, meanwhile, had retreated from the chaos of his empire. For the first time in his career, he had canceled meetings, postponed projects, and ignored stock reports. The company buzzed in confusion, but Richard didn't care. He found himself instead at the pier. Alone, he leaned against the railing, staring at the water where Maya had hurled her anger at him just nights before. The words still rang in his ears, "You don't get to claim me now." He didn't know if he would ever deserve another chance. But he knew one thing, he would not stop showing up. Not this time. Maya's decision came unexpectedly. She was polishing glasses at the restaurant when a young boy at one of the tables dropped his spoon. It clattered loudly, and he looked up at his mother with wide, apologetic eyes. The woman smiled, tousled his hair, and whispered something that made him grin again. The tenderness of it hit Maya like a wave. The simplicity of being seen, forgiven, loved despite mistakes. She felt her throat tighten. That night, instead of going straight home, she walked to the pier. And there he was, just as she'd imagined, Richard, sitting on the bench waiting. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, surprise flickering across his face. He quickly masked it with gentleness. "You came," he said quietly. "I didn't plan to," she admitted. "But here I am." They stood in silence for a moment, the breeze carrying the scent of river water, the faint hum of the city behind them. Finally, Maya sat beside him. "I read some of the letters," she said. His breath caught. "And?" She shrugged, but her eyes betrayed the storm inside. They were clumsy, rambling, sometimes angry, sometimes almost tender. They felt like a man trying to reach through a wall he'd built himself. Richard's jaw tightened. "That's exactly what they were." Maya glanced at him. "You could have mailed them. You didn't. I was afraid you'd hate me for intruding. Or worse, ignore me." He exhaled shakily. "But now I see. I robbed us both of the chance." Her voice softened. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Richard." Hearing his name instead of Dad was a knife to his chest. But he nodded. "That's fair. Forgiveness is a gift, not a right. All I ask is for the chance to prove, day by day, that I'm not the same coward I was." Maya's eyes glistened. "And what if you fail?" He looked at her with a rawness she had never seen. "Then I'll fail trying. But I won't disappear again. I'd rather face your anger for the rest of my life than your silence." Something inside Maya cracked. For years she had dreamed of him begging, apologizing, groveling. Now that it was here, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like healing, tentative and fragile. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the locket. Opening it, she showed him the folded letter inside. "I put one of your letters here," she whispered. "Not because I forgive you, but because maybe I want to try." Richard's breath trembled. He reached out, but stopped short of touching her, giving her the choice. Slowly, carefully, Maya placed her hand over his. The contact was electric. Not dramatic, not explosive, but steady. A bridge forming plank by plank. Weeks turned into months. The tabloids eventually lost interest, moving on to fresher scandals. Richard's board remained uneasy, but the company steadied. What mattered more to him now wasn't quarterly reports, but small, ordinary moments with Maya. Coffee on Sunday mornings. walks through the park. Long talks where she told him about her mother's favorite songs, her own dreams of becoming a teacher, the boy she once loved and lost. For every story she shared, he listened with reverence, absorbing the years he had missed. And for every silence, he respected her boundaries, never pushing too far. Maya didn't call him dad. Not yet. But sometimes, when she laughed unexpectedly at one of his clumsy jokes, or when she let him walk her home in comfortable quiet, it felt like the distance between them was shrinking. One evening, months later, Maya found herself back at the pier. Richard was already there, waiting as he always did. She sat beside him, holding the locket in her hand. Without looking at him, she whispered, "Mom used to say I'd have to decide if you belonged in here." She opened the locket and placed a small photo inside, the first one they had taken together, awkward and tentative, but real. She snapped it shut and looked at him. "I guess I decided." Richard's breath hitched. His eyes shimmered as he whispered, "Maya." And for the first time, she didn't stop him. "Dad," she said softly. The word was a bomb, a bridge, a homecoming. Tears streamed down Richard's face as he took her hand, holding it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. They sat in silence, watching the river carry the last of the sun's reflection into night. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was theirs. And sometimes love doesn't come the way you expect. Not as fireworks or fairy tales, but as the quiet decision to stay, to forgive, to try again. As the city hummed around them, father and daughter leaned into the fragile, beautiful truth that broken things can be mended, and that even in the wreckage of regret, love can still rise. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If this one kept you hooked, then you won't want to miss what's coming next. It's even wilder and more fascinating than you can imagine. Go ahead and click on the video showing on your screen right now to dive into the next story.